Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Miriam and I talk about all kinds of quilting and sewing related things here on YouTube. We are going through my quilting basics series here and this is video number 5. Last week we talked all about piecing, quilt blocks, and seams. We discussed seams in depth and I blabbed about it for almost an hour. So a lot of people seem to agree with me that consistency is better than perfection when it comes to, you know, that perfect 1/4 inch seam and everything. And I really appreciate all of the kind words that I've gotten, and I'm glad I'm not alone in my philosophy surrounding that specific topic. This week we are going to be talking about sashing. So we're going to cover what is sashing, why might you want to add sashing to your quilt if the quilt pattern doesn't include it, and all that sort of stuff. As you may or may not know, while I am doing the series, I am also making the sample quilt for my new quilt pattern, which I already released because a lot of people wanted to go ahead and buy it and make it along with me throughout these videos, which is super fun. So I've had quite a few people purchase it already and I am so grateful, and thank you so much for buying it and trusting that, you know, my pattern is good. And I've gotten a lot of really great feedback on it and people are already making theirs, and it's just so much fun to see someone make your pattern into an actual quilt. It's just really cool to see someone else enjoying something that you had a really fun time designing. So very happy about that. The pattern is called Cozy Picnic. Here it is. It is beautiful. It is gorgeous, I think. I might be a little biased because I made it, but I'm very, very excited about it. It's a super simple block. There's only one block in this quilt, but I have it in 2 different colorways. And here, I'll grab them here real quick. So it's a very, very simple block. So that's what it looks like. And there's the other colorway. And then we include some sashing and cornerstones in between the blocks to really elevate the design and really help the block stand out, and it just looks so beautiful. I'm very proud of it. It's a very cool quilt. I'm already excited to make another one in a different colorway. So yes, the pattern includes 5 sizes if you're interested, and there's a coloring page included, so if you want to play around with colors, you can print that out as many times as you want. Play around. If you want to try a scrappy style, you could do that. Yeah, I'm just very excited about this pattern. So if you would like to grab your copy, you should be able to see right underneath the description box, there should be like a little shopping feature. I'm trying out some new features on YouTube now that I've kind of hit a higher subscriber count. They're allowing me to try out, you know, more features and things. So you should see that. So I've got my patterns for sale directly here on YouTube. So it's it's hopefully a quicker checkout process for you. I've got that. I've got my other pattern also available down there if you're interested in that. But today, sashing. What is sashing? Pretty much, sashing is going to be a border that goes around your blocks. That's probably the easiest way to think of it. It's normally thinner. I like to do either like 1.5 inches, well, between 1 inch and 2 inch size sashing. I prefer the thinner looking sashing to like a really wide sashing, but it's totally up to you, and we're gonna go over why that is important. Before I jump in, I just wanted to say, if you have not subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing. We're having a lot of fun here. We're about halfway through the series, the Quilting Basics series. So if you want to continue seeing these videos, it probably would help if you subscribe and then hit the notification bell, so then you are notified when the next videos come out. So very excited about that. I also have a bonus video coming out on Saturday that I'm very excited about. You'll find out more about that on Saturday when that comes out, but very excited about that. Another thing I want to mention real quick, I just remembered, oh, my brain is all over the place today. So I am a Missouri Star Quilt Company partner, and what that means is they give me a discount code to give to you guys that you can use to purchase things from their website. So this month, March, is considered the National Quilting Month, and Missouri Star is doing all kinds of really awesome daily deals throughout this month, and they've also given me an extra discount link for you guys. So normally I have a 15% off discount, but for this month you can actually get 20% off your purchase. You have to reach the $50 threshold for your order to use that 20%, but if you're spending over $50, you will automatically get 20% off if you use my link, which is really great. And you can stack that discount on top of the daily deals. So for example, you probably won't be able to use this specific daily deal because just this video is not going to get out on time. But for example, today their t-shirts are 30% off, and because today is March 12th. So t-shirts are 30% off, and then you could use my link and get an additional 20% off of that. So that's kind of an example of how you can really stack those deals and save quite a bit of money, which is always a good thing, right? Because we want to be budget conscious when we are quilting, because quilting can be expensive. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that real quick. All right, now let's loop back around to what we're talking about today. Sashing is, I think, a very fun way to spice up a quilt pattern. So a lot of quilt patterns already are written with sashing included, but if they are not, you can add sashing to pretty much any quilt pattern. If they're using, quilt blocks, kind of traditionally pieced quilt blocks, you can use sashing to really change the look of that quilt. I'll give a couple of examples on the screen over in this area. So I'll give an example of my cozy picnic quilt, what it looks like without the sashing. And so you can kind of see how that differs from what it looks like with the sashing. So I'll do kind of like a side by side. And then I'll do the same thing with another quilt pattern that doesn't originally have sashing, but if you add sashing to it, it really makes the quilt look a lot different. Why would you want to add sashing to a quilt? Isn't it just extra work? Technically, yes, it would be extra work to include sashing, but there's a few reasons why you might want to do that. Number one, you might want to make the quilt larger. Let's say you have a quilt pattern for a 50 by 50 inch quilt top and you want it to be larger. You can add sashing between the blocks to significantly increase the width and the height of that quilt. So that's a big reason why I think a lot of people like to add sashing, is you can really adjust the size of a quilt. If you were to use like 2-inch wide sashing strips, you could go and let's say you have 5 quilt blocks or 6 quilt blocks, and you were to add those 2-inch increments in between each block, you would be adding, what, 10 inches or so? Is that correct? Yeah, 10 inches to the width. So then it could be a 60-inch by 60-inch quilt and so on. And if you wanted it to be even wider, you could do thicker sashing. There is no rule about how thick the sashing has to be. And even if there was a rule, we know that that really doesn't matter because you make your own rules with quilting. That's a big reason why you might want to add sashing to a quilt. Another reason is it helps the blocks really pop and stand out. So having that solid border around the quilt block is really going to help the design of the actual quilt block stand out. And a lot of times that is really fun to do, especially a lot of people like to use kind of like a solid light colored sashing or a solid dark colored sashing. And that really helps that quilt block pop on the background color, which would be the sashing. So that is another reason why you might want to use sashing. Another reason that I have found personally with making memory quilts, if you're working with a lot of different types of fabrics and like stretchy fabrics and knits and all kinds of stuff, denim, those fabrics kind of are it's easy for them to kind of go a little wonky, and you don't really want that to happen. And what I found when making memory quilts is if you include sashing between the blocks, it really helps to kind of stabilize the overall quilt top, which is important because when you make a quilt out of a bunch of different types of fabrics, you want it to last, right? You don't want it to be falling apart or kind of getting stretched in a weird way. So the sashing acts kind of like as a stabler and as a foundation for those blocks to stay square, basically. So that's another reason why I like to use sashing, and I used sashing quite a bit when I made memory quilts just because of that reason. So those are some of the reasons why you might want to use sashing. On the other hand, if a quilt pattern that you are using has sashing and you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it. You can cut it out. But you should know that the look of the quilt is obviously going to change, and the size dimensions are going to change also. So just keep that in mind if you decide to cut it out. Yeah, so that is kind of why you would want to use sashing, why sashing is included in patterns. It really adds a nice design element to the overall look of the quilt top. So how do you add sashing? Usually when you are adding sashing, you first add the vertical pieces in between the blocks, and then you add either just a long strip of fabric to horizontally once you have your rows sewn together, or if your design uses cornerstones like this quilt pattern, the cozy picnic pattern, you create that strip with the sashing and cornerstones to create that horizontal sashing piece. First, let's go over a little bit of terminology. So just in case you don't know kind of the terminology of quilt patterns and what quilt designers will kind of use as the terms to know. So when you're looking at a quilt, the horizontal blocks and sashing going this way, that is a row, and the blocks going this way, this is a column. So that's important to know, right? So as you can see, in between these two blocks, we have a sashing piece, right? And then so on. There's a sashing piece, there's a sashing piece, okay? So when we sew these blocks and sashing pieces together, that creates a row. Then in between the two rows, we have a sashing strip. So this is, we've got sashing, and then this little brown square, that's called a cornerstone. So you go sashing, cornerstone, sashing, cornerstone, sashing, cornerstone, and so on. And that creates that horizontal strip that goes between the rows. So hopefully that made sense. So a cornerstone just kind of adds just a little extra detail. I really like cornerstones. I think they look really cute. They added like a little pop of color there, which I personally enjoy. If you would like to leave out you don't want to use cornerstones, all you need to do then is measure how long your row is and cut your strips that length, or sew two strips together if your rows are longer than the regular 42-inch width of fabric. So you'd have to sew two strips together to make that width that you need, and then whatever thickness or width of sashing you want. If you want 2-inch sashing, then you need to cut a strip or create a strip that's as long as your rows, and then whatever width you want. And don't forget to add the seam allowance to that width. So let's say you want a 2-inch wide sashing, then you would be cutting your strips at 2.5 inches wide, because you need 1/4 inch seam allowance on either side. So keep that in mind. Don't forget about that. I have been there. It is annoying when you realize that you messed that up. You live and you learn. You know, with quilting, you live and you learn. And you're learning lessons probably with every quilt that you're gonna make. There's gonna be a lesson learned, which I really like about quilting. You're constantly learning, and it's just a lot of fun. So yeah, that's kind of how the construction goes when you are putting your quilt top together. So you create your rows using the vertical sashing pieces, and then you create your little sashing strips that go in between the rows. And then I would sew all of my rows together first, or create all of my rows first, and then sew the entire quilt top together. So that's kind of how I like to do it. I think that's how most quilt patterns are going to be written, is you're going to create rows first rather than creating columns, though some quilt pattern designers might have you create columns and then sew columns together instead of rows and then sewing rows together, if that makes sense. Either way is fine. There's no right or wrong with that. You know, you're still making a quilt top, you're just making it different, right? Which is okay. Now that we kind of know how that goes, let's sew some quilt blocks and sashing together, shall we? So this is going to be very similar to last week's video with the piecing process, so I'm not gonna go super in depth with that, just because I don't want to bore you guys with basically teaching the exact same thing. So let's sew some together. I have my big pile of sashing pieces already cut, ready to go, and I just have my quilt blocks up here in front of my sewing machine, so that's gonna make it a little bit easier for me to see. Let's sew our first sashing piece on. So you take your sashing piece and you put it right sides together with your quilt block and line it up. And just like last week, remember how we pressed our seams? I pressed our seams all to one side, kind of like that. You want to make sure that when you are stitching your sashing to your blocks, that the seam stays laying in the same direction that you had pressed it. So we don't want it to get twisted and like pushed up like that, right? Because then that just kind of adds weird bulk to that seam. So we just want that to stay laying down flat, and same with this one, laying down flat. So just keep an eye on that when you're sewing. Okay, see? So we've got a sashing piece added. So now we grab our next block that goes in the row, which is going to be one of our green blocks, and I'm just going to put it right sides together with that sashing piece. And sew together. See? And there's our cute sashing separating our blocks. So see how it's gonna really help those blocks pop. Ugh, I just love it. And these colors are so great together. I love it. So now we're just gonna add another sashing piece, and you literally just do this for the entire piecing process of the rows. So I am going to keep sewing, and I am going to actually sew a few rows together, and then I'll show you how I piece my sashing and cornerstones to create that strip, okay? And we'll go over pressing and everything with that also. So just continue watching this fun sped up version of me sewing with some fun music playing, and I will meet you back very soon. So I have my first row sewn together and it looks great. What I will do for pressing is, when I'm going to press, I am just going to press all of the seams going towards the sashing. They're already kind of wanting to lay that way, so that's the way that I am gonna press all of those seams. I'm gonna go ahead and make at least one more row so I can show you how to add the horizontal sashing strip. Then we will move on from there, all right? All right, well, I went ahead and made 2 rows of my blocks and my sashing, and I just wanted to show you what they looked like. How pretty is this? But okay, this is what the sashing looks like when it's pressed. Nice and flat, and I wanted to show you specifically what it looked like on the back. So see, I have the sashing seams going towards the sashing, and that's kind of the natural way it was wanting to lay, so that's the way that I pressed it. Everything's nice and flat and beautiful, and these are ready to be sewn together now with our sashing and cornerstone rows. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Since I am using cornerstones, I am using the same size sashing strip as I did for the vertical sashing pieces. So, and if you are wanting to add sashing to a quilt pattern that doesn't have sashing, all you need to do is measure the, measure your blocks. So my blocks are 9.5 inches square. So my strips needed to be 9.5 inches. So they're the same size, the same height, and the same length as my blocks. And then I wanted a nice thin inch sashing because I just like the look of the thin sashing. So I cut sashing strips that are 1.5 inches wide. So I have those. For my cornerstones need to be the same width as my sashing. So that means I cut, look how cute these are. They're just little tiny squares. But these are 1.5 inch squares for my cornerstones, and they're gonna finish off as an inch square in the quilt. It's gonna look really cute. It's just a little pop. To make my sashing row, I do the exact same thing as I did with adding my sashing to my blocks. I grab a sashing piece like that and a cornerstone square, and I put them right sides together so it looks like that. And then I just sew them together along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You want to make sure that your fabrics stay lined up. Okay, so there's my little 1/4 inch seam. Then I open this up and I add my next piece of sashing. Like that. And you just keep on going on with the next cornerstone. Like that. And a piece of sashing. And what happens with this layout is the sashing strip lines up perfectly with the bottom and the top of my quilt blocks, and then my little cornerstone lines up perfectly with the vertical sashing strip of the rows. So it just gives it a really nice clean look. I really like using cornerstones and sashing together. So that's how we put those together. I'm gonna go ahead and make a couple of these. For the pressing of these rows, I'm going to press them the same way. So I'm going to have the seams going towards the sashing pieces. The reason why I'm doing that is then when my seams meet on my sashing rows and my block rows, those seams are going to nest really well, and it's gonna line up perfectly and everything will lay nice and flat and crisp. So that's a little tip for you. So when you want to press your seams on your rows, if you want to press them out, then you would press these seams in. Or if you were to press all of your seams to one side on the rows, then on the sashing rows you would press all the seams to the opposite side. And that just helps seams nest, which is helpful when you want the quilt top to lay nice and flat. So I'm gonna keep on making a couple of these, and then we will sew them onto the blocks, and then we're gonna see kind of what this quilt is gonna look like. And I am ridiculously excited because when I get to this point in making a quilt top, I am just like, okay, let's go. It is go time. I don't need to go to the bathroom. I don't need to eat. I don't need to sleep. I just need to sew because I want to see what this is gonna look like. So I'm kind of experiencing that right now. I'm gonna go ahead and sew these together, and I'll meet you back in, well, in like 2 seconds from here for you, but it's gonna be several minutes for me. Okay. So I've got my little strip made here, and just so you can see, that's what it looks like with my seams pressed out towards the sashing. Okay, so that's what it looks like. And now we're going to sew them together. So I've got my first row here, my row number 1. And when you're adding your sashing, just make sure you're adding it to the correct part of the of the block of the row. So if you don't need sashing on the top, make sure you're sewing sashing on the bottom edge. It's just something to be aware of. So now we just line up, just like we've been doing with all the rest of our piecing. We line up our fabric with the edge. Okay, see how my sashing is the perfect width, and my seams are lining up perfectly, and they're going to nest, which means one goes one way and the other goes the other way. I hope you can see that all right. And they just come together and they perfectly lay down nice and flat when they're stitched down. So, and that's what all of my seams are gonna do because of the way that we pressed. So pressing is important, but I don't want you to stress it, okay? Don't stress it. Especially if you're a super beginner, like learn by, you know, trial and error, basically, and it's supposed to be fun. And again, I'm gonna make sure that all of the seams are laying in the way that I pressed them while I'm stitching them down. Now, it is very important as you are sewing your long strips together with your rows that you are not pulling on this, on either, hard, because that's going to give you a weird wave in your seam, and it's not gonna look great, and it's gonna wreak havoc when you go to quilt. So just be super aware that you are not pulling anything as you're going, because that's gonna also put strain on your seams, which you don't want. And you can definitely pin your pieces together if you want. If you would prefer to do that, go right ahead. I don't pin. What I choose not to do, but if you're more comfortable with using pins, then I say go for it. And that's what it looks like. So see, there's our little cornerstone that lined up with our top sashing, and our horizontal sashing lines up with the bottom of our blocks. So there we go. Let's add another row and another strip. So I usually just sit at my machine and just kind of press this open with my hand. Just like that. And it usually stays folded over enough for the piecing process. So I do that, and then I grab my other row here. And we're just going to do the same thing, put our right sides together. My seams are nested there. And then we're just going to sew these together. And that is what it looks like with sashing in between. Oh my goodness. It looks so cute. Huh? I'm gonna add my last sashing row, and then we're gonna wrap this video up, okay? All right, are you ready to see what I have done so far? So here's what we got so far. We got 2 rows done. And it looks so nice. I just love it. See how that sashing really helps the block stand out and pop? And I love the little cornerstones. I think they look so cute in this design. And they're like a little centerpiece for like an extra little block there. Just looks really, really nice. Very intentional looking. I really love this pattern. I hope you guys like it too. Don't forget, it is for sale now. It's called Cozy Picnic. I will have it in that little shopping area, and I'll also include a link down in the description box below. And I just really appreciate you guys watching. I'm gonna continue working on this, and I will do the grand reveal of the completed quilt top next week. Okay, so you'll have to come back next week to see what it looks like completed, and then we're gonna go on from there. We're gonna keep on finishing the quilt and making it, and it's gonna be lots of fun. Don't forget, there's gonna be a bonus episode on Saturday. Very, very excited about it. Just thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed. I'd be really happy for you to join my little quilting family here. And just thank you so much. Don't forget the Missouri Star Quilt Company discount, 20% off this month only. Then we'll go back to our regular 15% off with that link. It's a great way to save some money, right? So stock up on what you need and grab those deals when you can. And just thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be talking to you down in the comments and everything. And let me know if you have any questions or any comments or anything about today's video. It was a lot of fun to shoot. So have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye.